Have you ever wondered why Italy, a country renowned for its luxury cars and world-famous pasta, struggles with persistent economic crises? Despite its cultural richness, Italy's economy teeters on the brink of collapse, with high unemployment, an aging population, and a mounting national debt. Factors that only scratch the surface of a deeper crisis. Did you know that Italy's public debt exceeds 150% of its gross domestic product? This means the nation owes more than it produces, a staggering burden that hampers growth. In contrast, Germany, often seen as Europe's most stable economy, maintains a debt level around 70% of its GDP. Such excessive debt forces the Italian government to allocate enormous sums to service interest payments, diverting resources from vital areas like social programs and infrastructure investments. Citizens have grown accustomed to austerity measures and budget cuts that hinder economic development. For example, in a small Calabrian town, local authorities had to slash funding for schools and hospitals just to meet debt obligations. Furthermore, the situation in southern Italy is particularly dire, with some regions so impoverished they resemble ghost towns. Cities in Basilicata and Calabria report unemployment rates exceeding 30%, prompting many young people to leave immediately after finishing school or university. They seek opportunities elsewhere, primarily in northern European countries. An illustrative example is the city of Gangi, where officials sold properties for just €1 to attract new residents and revive the local economy. Yet, despite these incentives, most young Italians prefer to migrate to places offering stability and prospects for a better future. These realities reveal the true scale of Italy's crisis. Paradoxically, Italy's economy, part of one of the most developed regions in the world, presents a stark contrast. Luxurious villas and bustling cafes coexist with abandoned buildings and empty storefronts. Why has Italy, which once thrived for centuries, fallen into such disrepair? To understand, we must look back a few decades. After World War II, Italy was at the heart of Europe's recovery, receiving billions of dollars through the Marshall Plan. This period saw rapid growth but also inequality, laying the groundwork for future issues. In the year 1980, Italy faced one of its most tragic events, the bombing at the Bologna train station, which became a symbol of political instability. This attack shocked the nation and exposed deep societal divisions. Tensions between radical political factions intensified, affecting all aspects of life, including the economy. The Italian government was forced to divert resources to internal security, leaving less room for long-term economic investments. These historical and social fractures continue to influence Italy's economic landscape today. Imagine a nation that, unlike many of its European neighbors, prioritized security and political stability over infrastructure and technological advancement. While others poured resources into modernizing their economies, Italy allocated a significant portion of its budget to safeguarding its internal order. Despite external support and investments, the Italian economy periodically faced downturns, shrinking by as much as 20% of its gross domestic product during these crises. Following a rapid expansion in the 50s and 60s, Italy's economic growth slowed dramatically starting in the 1970s, ushering in its first major stagnation. This downturn was fueled not only by internal issues but also by global shocks, such as the 1973 oil crisis, which spiked energy prices and dealt a heavy blow to the economy. As a result, Italy experienced record inflation, with some years seeing prices rise into double digits, profoundly affecting everyday life. Many businesses closed, unemployment soared, and the cost of essential goods became unaffordable for many citizens. The economic boom of the 1950s was driven largely by investments and infrastructure projects. However, this rapid expansion carried the risk of overinvestment, a problem that became apparent decades later. Italy's economy relied heavily on debt to fund development, creating a fragile foundation that lacked sustainable growth. A stark example of this imbalance is the construction of large-scale projects that later proved unnecessary or underused. Today, abandoned industrial zones on the outskirts of Milan and Rome serve as stark reminders of squandered resources. Have you ever wondered why Italy's economic history resembles a roller coaster? After each rapid ascent, a period of stagnation or even decline almost always followed. Take the post-World War II years. Italy, ravaged by war, revived through foreign investments and the Marshall Plan, which propelled a vigorous economic expansion in the 1950s. During this time, Italy became one of Europe's leading economies, boosting manufacturing and exports. Yet, this boom was soon followed by a sharp downturn. By the 1970s, Italy was grappling with high debt levels and inflation. Many projects had been financed through external borrowing, artificially sustaining growth. The situation worsened with global shocks like the oil crisis, which hit Italy's energy-dependent economy hard. Unemployment increased, prices for basic goods soared, and the quality of life for ordinary Italians deteriorated. Despite decades of building a powerful economic structure, Italy struggled to adapt to these new realities. This cyclical pattern persisted in the subsequent decades. The 1980s saw another wave of growth, driven again by exports and industrial development, only to be followed by periods of stagnation. Each cycle underscored the fragile balance between rapid expansion and the risks of overextension, revealing a nation caught in a relentless pattern of boom and bust. Long-standing economic challenges have once again begun to accumulate in Italy, leading to a slowdown by the end of the decade. Each new surge of growth brought fresh difficulties, straining public finances, prompting reforms, and forcing the country to navigate the strict requirements of the European Union. The question arises, why does Italy, a nation that repeatedly demonstrated resilience and strength, continually revert to stagnation? The answer is straightforward. Its previous successes were built on temporary fixes and debt obligations, rather than establishing a solid foundation for sustainable growth. Consequently, Italy often relied on short-term boosts, which ultimately resulted in recurring periods of economic stagnation. Despite emerging from the ruins of World War II, Italy failed to harness that initial momentum for long-term development. Measures once deemed salvation eventually turned into new obstacles, perpetuating a cycle of decline. Today, Italy faces numerous issues: an aging population, widespread emigration of young professionals, and high poverty levels, especially in the South. Annually, over 100,000 talented young Italians leave the country, transforming Italy into a net exporter of human capital. This figure becomes even more alarming when considering that many emigrants are graduates from prestigious universities, such as the University of Bocconi in Milan. As a result, Italy loses millions of euros invested in educating these young people, who then apply their skills abroad. The question is, why do so many ambitious young Italians choose to leave? Graduates from top institutions like Bocconi often migrate to Germany, France, and the Netherlands. The expansion of the European Union and the policy of free movement have opened doors to more developed economies, where salaries are higher and career prospects broader. Italy, having invested heavily in its education system, ends up losing its brightest minds to other countries' opportunities. One might wonder why Italy does not create conditions to retain these talented individuals. The problem extends beyond low wages and economic hardships. Italian companies are generally smaller than their Western European counterparts, limiting their ability to offer advanced technologies and growth opportunities. As a result, Italy becomes a net exporter of brains, losing its potential amid fierce competition within the EU. This brain drain is particularly damaging for a nation already grappling with demographic decline and an aging population. Ironically, Italy, one of the founding members of the European Union, faces challenges that membership itself has partly exacerbated. Young people leave in search of better pay and living conditions, deepening economic and social issues. Youth unemployment soars to an alarming 23%, fueling social unrest and disillusionment about the future. In certain regions like Calabria and Sicily, the situation is even more pronounced, with the percentage of multi-generational households approaching 40%. Italian families often find themselves living under one roof across several generations because adult children cannot afford independent housing. A vivid example is the Ricci family from southern Napoli, where three generations share a modest two-room apartment, reducing expenses while dreaming of leaving the country altogether. Have you ever wondered why this persists? Despite ongoing efforts to revive the economy, Italy continues to face significant challenges. In today's world, the country confronts a series of new obstacles that render its position particularly fragile. One of the most pressing issues is demographic aging. Over 23% of Italians are now over 65, and this figure keeps rising. Such a trend places enormous strain on pension systems and healthcare services, further squeezing the national budget. This raises a critical question: who will sustain the economy in the future? As the workforce diminishes and the number of pensioners grows, the situation worsens, especially with the mass emigration of young professionals seeking better opportunities abroad. Talented graduates from Italian universities are increasingly drawn to countries offering higher salaries and promising career prospects. This brain drain depletes Italy's potential, leaving behind a demographic gap and a deficit of innovative ideas. Another challenge is the low level of digitalization and slow adoption of new technologies. Many small and medium-sized enterprises still operate using outdated methods, avoiding significant investments in modern equipment and digital infrastructure. In a world where technological competitiveness is vital, Italy lags behind. Companies that neglect digital transformation risk losing productivity and falling behind competitors in Germany, France, and other nations where digitalization is now standard. The situation is further complicated by global instability, new trade barriers, and the need to adapt swiftly to international market changes, areas where Italy shows insufficient flexibility. The country's economy remains overly reliant on traditional practices, limiting its ability to grow rapidly and adjust to new realities. This predicament is worsened by economic inequality. The northern regions, such as Lombardy and Veneto, are considerably wealthier than the south. The disparity in living standards is stark, with the gross domestic product per capita in the north exceeding 50% more than in the south. For instance, Milan, Italy's financial and industrial hub, thrives with booming businesses and advanced technology sectors. Conversely, in the South, young people are often forced to leave their hometowns in search of employment that simply does not exist. Why is this happening? Many once thriving Italian companies, especially in textiles and manufacturing, now teeter on the brink of survival. Globalization has opened new doors for business, but has also introduced formidable challenges. Numerous Italian firms have begun relocating their production facilities abroad to remain competitive in a globalized economy. The primary reason is clear. Companies tend to produce where taxes and wages are lower, enabling them to cut costs and remain competitive globally. However, this approach poses significant problems for Italy. Each factory relocation results in job losses and reduced tax revenues, which are not mere theories but tangible realities. Imagine large corporations seeking more favorable conditions in countries like Turkey or Eastern Europe, leaving local workers unemployed. This exodus weakens the domestic economy, especially in regions heavily dependent on manufacturing. Globalization has intensified competition from countries with lower production costs, forcing Italian brands known for their quality to fight harder for customers. Many consumers, drawn by cheaper options, often opt for imports, bypassing Italy's renowned craftsmanship. This shift impacts the entire national landscape. Economic inequality deepens, particularly between the prosperous North and the struggling South, where dependence on large factories is even greater. As jobs vanish and businesses shut down, cities turn into zones of economic stagnation, exacerbating regional disparities. The transfer of production abroad and the influx of inexpensive imports create a vicious cycle, causing entire regions to decline. Italy faces the challenge of breaking free from this loop, but each problem seems interconnected, forming a complex web of economic stagnation. Can the country find a way out of this downward spiral? One significant obstacle is the shadow economy, an underground sector that sustains a large part of Italian production. This phenomenon extends beyond stereotypes of mafia influence, rooted instead in weak taxation and regulation systems. At its peak, the black market accounted for nearly a quarter of Italy's economic activity, a figure unmatched by any other developed nation. Although this share has decreased to about 12%, it remains alarmingly high for a country with advanced infrastructure. For comparison, Germany's shadow economy hovers below 5%. The persistent problem lies in the enormous loss of tax revenue, around 100 billion euros annually, that could fund healthcare, infrastructure, and education, but instead slips into the gray economy. Where do these funds go? Consider small family-run restaurants and workshops in southern cities, which often evade official accounting to avoid heavy taxes. For owners like the pizza shopkeeper in Palermo, such practices are essential for survival, as they cannot sustain their businesses under mounting fiscal pressure. The root cause of the thriving informal sector is the limited alternatives available to ordinary people, forcing many into the shadows to make ends meet. Small and medium-sized enterprises, which form the backbone of Italy's economy, face significant challenges when competing against large corporations and overcoming bureaucratic hurdles. To survive, many of these businesses are compelled to cut costs, often resorting to illegal practices. For instance, approximately 3 million Italians work in the informal sector, creating a vast array of hidden jobs that, despite their utility, ultimately harm the national economy. Have you ever wondered why Italy's economy, renowned for its family-run workshops and small businesses, struggles to sustain consistent growth? In Italy, small businesses are more than just an economic category. They embody a cultural tradition. These can be seen in tiny bakeries, family-owned restaurants, and artisanal workshops producing shoes or furniture. While their contributions add unique character and diversity to the market, this sector faces numerous obstacles that hinder its development. One of the primary issues is the limited size of these enterprises. On average, Italian companies are considerably smaller than their counterparts in other European nations, which diminishes their ability to compete globally. Large firms can afford to invest heavily in new technologies, optimize production, and expand their output. Conversely, small businesses often remain tied to traditional methods due to a lack of funds and growth opportunities. You might wonder why these small enterprises do not band together to strengthen their competitiveness. The answer lies in the complex bureaucratic and tax systems that make collaboration difficult. Many small businesses operate in semi-legal conditions to avoid excessive costs, which further limits their access to government support programs and credit facilities. This situation hampers their capacity for innovation and growth. It's important to remember that small companies uphold Italy's reputation for high-quality products. Yet, in today's world, this alone is insufficient. Without access to modern technology and governmental backing, small businesses find themselves in a tough position, fighting merely to survive rather than aiming for expansion. It's perplexing how a country with such potential remains overshadowed by its own successes. Despite ongoing efforts, economic inequality continues to widen. Nevertheless, Italy remains one of the largest economies in Europe and the world. History shows that the nation has weathered crises and rebounded, but the question remains: can it experience an industrial revival akin to the boom that doubled its economic output between 1985 and 1992? That period's growth was driven by exports of high-quality goods like automobiles, clothing, and furniture, illustrating the country's capacity for rapid economic expansion. Historically, Italy's reputation for craftsmanship and quality set a global standard, a legacy that still holds significance today. Yet, in recent years, Italy's national debt has begun to grow once more, fueled by government and public complacency that relied on continuous economic expansion. By the year 2023, Italy's debt had soared to €2,070 billion, a staggering burden that weighs heavily on the nation's economy. According to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, Italy ranks near the bottom within the European Union when it comes to the adoption of digital technologies among businesses. This lag hampers productivity and leaves Italian companies at a disadvantage compared to more technologically advanced nations like Germany and France. For instance, northern Italian manufacturing firms are investing in automation to stay competitive. Yet many small enterprises remain tied to traditional, less efficient methods. So, what steps are necessary for Italy to overcome this crisis? Can the country reconsider its governance model and attract fresh investments to generate employment and stimulate economic growth? These questions invite reflection on Italy's future prospects.